Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings wide receiver picks for week 11. There's a lot of guys that we're looking at this week, and there's a ton of guys that are on the injured report. A bunch of them are questionable. A couple guys are doubtful. You definitely got to make sure that you look at the injury reports before this weekend. You're going to have some value open up with some of the cheaper wide receivers if some of these guys are out, and you're also going to have some of these guys that are in, and you really want to check and see exactly how injured they are, if they're going to be limited or if they're going to be seeing their full allotment of snaps, because it's definitely going to affect which guys you want to put into your roster. We're going to call up the slideshow for now and go over some of the guys who are not on the injured report, who we think are going to be in good spots and could be some of the glue guys you want to build your rosters around. The four guys that are going to be on our list this week, excuse me, are going to be Mike Evans at 7,300, Michael Crabtree at 6,000. Jordan Matthews is going to be my bold call of the week, and we'll talk about that when we get there at $6,000 as well. And then Stevie Johnson at 3,900 is just way too cheap for the new role that he's playing. Evans is an underdog against Philly, so they should be throwing late. Whenever a team is down, they're usually able to rack up some garbage points. Philly's run defense has been pretty good, but they have been able to get beat by wide receivers. They've given up the 5th most points so far this year to the wide receiver position. And as we know, that Philly team plays at a fast pace, so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for guys on Tampa Bay to score some fantasy points. Mike Evans has 53 targets over his last 4 games, so he's averaging over 13 targets a game, which is one of the highest we see for any wide receiver right now. He's been coming down with 8 catches in 3 of his last 4 weeks, and he's averaging 22 fantasy points over the last 4 games with Vincent Jackson out. It's very likely that Vincent Jackson's going to be out again this week, and we don't even know if they're going to have Austin Seferian-Jenkins back as well. If you're missing 2 of the top 3 pass catchers on the team, Evans is going to see a lot of targets, and those targets, whether or not he catches them all, are still going to wind up being a good number of catches, a good number of yards, and a good number of fantasy points for him. The next guy we're going to talk about is Michael Crabtree. Crabtree's only $6,000. He plays for Oakland, who faces a Detroit pass defense that has been one of the weakest in the leagues this year. That Oakland passing game is on fire as well. Crabtree's averaging 6 catches for 82 yards and a touchdown over his last 4 games. He's seeing about 9.4 targets per game, which actually makes him the leader on his team. Amari Cooper is more expensive and gets a lot more of the hype, but Crabtree's the one that's been really getting it done lately. He also has more red zone looks than anybody else on his team. It's not that we don't like Cooper either. I think both guys are in play this week. But I think you can take the discount on Crabtree knowing that he's seeing more targets, and he probably has a better chance to have a safer floor, and they probably have pretty much the same ceiling. Although Amari Cooper might be able to catch a few more of the long touchdowns, Cooper's probably going to wind up with a few more targets, probably wind up with a few more yards unless Cooper does get a long touchdown. And again, Crabtree's been the one who's been seeing most of the red zone looks, so that's probably the guy that we want to look for here. Again, I don't mind either one of them. I also think Derek Carr's in a good spot if you want to stack them up together. But I think if I had to choose between Crabtree and Cooper, I'm going to go with Crabtree this week. The next guy we're going to talk about, like I said, this is my bold call of the week, but I think Jordan Matthews at $6,000 is somebody who's going to be back in play. With Mark Sanchez now in there at quarterback, him and Sanchez hooked up a lot late last season. Sanchez is actually one of the guys who started targeting Matthews and helped him get that big contract in the offseason and help the Eagles realize that, Jordan Matthews could be their number 1 receiver and they could let Jeremy Maclin go. Tampa Bay's run defense has been very, very good lately, so Philly's going to have to throw the ball in this game. We should see Matthews in the slot getting somewhere between 7 and 10 targets, and he has a very solid matchup against a secondary that's allowing 25 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. With Matthews being clearly the top wide receiving option that the Eagles have, and with Sanchez back on the center, I think these two could hook up again like they did last year, and we can see a little bit of magic at a pretty cheap price. The last guy we're going to talk about is Stevie Johnson. Stevie's an underdog, so he definitely should see some garbage time. You got Malcolm Floyd banged up and Keenan Allen, who's out for the season, so Stevie is basically the de facto number 1 receiver now for the San Diego Chargers. KC actually allows the 2nd most points on the year to fantasy wide receivers, so you can't really ask for a much better spot for Stevie Johnson in this one. Plus, we know that his quarterback, Phillip Rivers, loves throwing the ball. Rivers has been throwing it over 40 times a game, and Stevie saw 10 targets last week with, no Keenan Allen. So I think that Stevie's in a good spot this week to see a bunch of targets. He is dirt cheap for a number 1 wide receiver in a pass-heavy offense, And you really only need him to get you about 6 to 8 catches for 60 to 80 yards in order to pay it off. If he is able to get a touchdown, then you really can probably get away with 4 or 5 catches for 40 or 50 yards, and he's still going to be one of the best value plays on the day. So that pretty much sums it up for the wide receivers that we're looking at this week. As I said, some of the guys at the top of the list are basically in really tough spots because a lot of them are injured, a lot of them aren't practicing today, and we just don't know how many of them are going to be in by the end of the week. Right now, these are some of the glue guys that we really like. You can look at a guy like Julio. You can look at a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, these are highly targeted wide receivers every week. Hopkins is going up against the Jets, so he's going to get a little bit of Revis defense. And there's a lot of other tough matchups up there for some of these expensive wide receivers this week. So these are the guys that I'm going to be looking at to roll out in my roster. As we said in the running back video, this is a week where it looks like you can pay up for a couple of these running backs. So maybe the pricing that DraftKings has changed up a little bit is going to allow you to change up your roster construction a little. And I think this might be the first week where you can start tinkering around with some of that and, putting in some of those guys that you haven't really been playing so far this year. So this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com. Thank you for joining us. And as always, stay classy, DFS.